On this episode of the Fieldhouse Files, I'm joined by Tim MacMahon. You know him, of course, from ESPN and from the Hoop Collective podcast with Brian Windhorst. We get into his new book out this week on Luka Dončić, the process that went into it, and Rick Carlisle being there from the beginning.
I know that Fieldhouse Files has a prolific following. I just want to be careful about sharing too much with the world.
And welcome into the Fieldhouse Files, the podcast where I take you behind the scenes with the Pacers, talk to individuals on and around the team, and tell you what you need to know. On this very special episode, I'm joined by Tim MacMahon. His book, The Wonder Boy, Luka Dončić and the Curse of Greatness, is out this week, and I can guarantee you he did the legwork, that he did a thorough job in reporting out this story. You see, he's been in Dallas for as long as I can remember. He was there from the beginning when Luka was a rookie, and even before that, when he was simply a draft pick. And it's complicated. So much has happened with the Dallas Mavericks, say, even in just the last decade. And to get Luka, it wasn't even drafting him. They had to acquire that pick from the Atlanta Hawks. Then there's Mark Cuban, from running the team to selling it for reasons unknown, and then losing controlling interest. And for that reason and more, Luka is no longer there with the Mavericks anymore. I'll never forget where I was when that trade went down earlier this year. I was there leaving Lucas Oil Stadium right here in downtown Indianapolis after being ringside for the monster WWE event. Tyrese Haliburton, the Pacers are sprinting over there, and I was wanting to cover that and see what this WWE hype was all about. They all sat in row one and obviously had a great time being able to be there, probably for about half of the evening because it was also a game night. But that night was just so bizarre. It was shocking for all of us to see that alert that had us all wonder if Shams got hacked. But no way that could be real, but it was. So MacMahon was there to cover Rick Carlisle in Dallas, so we also discussed that, his influence in Luka Dončić, plus Rick's pursuit of Tyrese and his attempt to even get Tyrese to Dallas years earlier. So make sure you're subscribed to this podcast and especially to fieldhousefiles.com so that every story is delivered right to your inbox. Now, here's my conversation with Tim MacMahon. All right, we're now recording this a day after the big day for Tim, and I'm so happy to be joined by Tim MacMahon. You see him everywhere on ESPN. You hear him with our guy Wendy on the Hoop Collective. But take me through the last 24 hours, Tim. There's so much that goes into something like this, a player you've covered for so long, but to put it into one book that'll be there forever. What was this process like for you, and how rewarding has the last 24 hours been for you?
Howdy, partner. Appreciate you having me and plugging the book, first of all. And the last 24 hours, it's been a lot of yammering about the book. But look, man, it's a fascinating subject. And obviously, as I'm going through the process of writing this book, there were times when I felt like this thing could end with Luka being traded. I never imagined it would be because the Mavericks decided to dump him. But there were, like, the whole premise of the book is there's this pressure on a franchise when you draft a prodigy. And I wrote it through the prism, obviously, of Luka and the Dallas Mavericks, who have had all kinds of drama and dysfunction leading into Luka's career, throughout Luka's career. And there were certainly times, especially when they tanked to keep the top 10 protected pick they still owed for a co-star who wasn't even on the roster anymore, that I thought, they might just flat out fail to build a team good enough around this guy to make him feel like he had the realistic option of staying in Dallas. They scrambled and managed to build a finals team. Months later, they traded him. The book was put to bed at that point. For a wide variety of reasons, obviously, that the wee morning hours of February 2nd were pretty insane. One part of that was me reaching out to the book folks and saying, hey, we got to figure something out. Like, there's a little plot twist here. So I did manage to write a final unplanned chapter. There were a bunch of books already printed at that point. People who get those books will have to click a link, with proof of purchase and get the final chapter sent to them via PDF. What an insane way, though, to wrap up a fascinating story that took all sorts of twists and turns, and it's crazy. The ending of the original book was this upbeat, happy, still open-ended, but happy ending because they just got into the finals. There was no question in his mind that Dallas was a place that he could stay and contend for championships, just as he always wanted. And then they dumped him months later. What a heartbreaking turn of events for Mavericks fans, to say the least.
Feels like it's been a roller coaster of events. Just if you talk about the Mavericks organization as a whole, they were well thought of. Obviously, I'm in Indiana, so Mark Cuban's beloved here for IU and all of that. And then you have this summer, and you were among those reporting, yeah, he still plans to be there, and he tells you, I still plan to run the franchise, but he never got that in writing. I'm still waiting for that because a businessman as brilliant as Cuban, you get that in writing. Like, that would be a mistake you make with your first business, not your 150th.
Well, and with Mark Cuban, who is, another fascinating character that I've covered throughout my career and certainly gets a lot of time.
Sure.
It's always dangerous to assume that the words that are coming out of his mouth are true, to say the least. I mean, it's the way it is. Like in this book, there's several significant occasions where what he said was proved to be absolutely false. Now, in this instance, I don't know if he was telling a whopper or trying to speak something into existence. I really don't know. But the simple fact is, as soon as Mark Cuban gave up the majority share of the franchise, he was done controlling basketball operations, no matter what he was telling people publicly at the time. And if Mark Cuban doesn't give up control of the basketball operations, there is a 0.0% chance that this trade happens.
Yeah.
Cuban, and I would argue rightfully, it might not have always been, the execution might not have always been the best, but rightfully Cuban's priority for the first 6 years of Luka's career was doing everything in his power to make sure that Luka was as happy as possible, doing everything in his power to make sure that Luka felt like, hey, I've got everything I need right here in Dallas. This is my second home. I'm good. Just like Dirk, I can spend my entire career here in Dallas. They kissed Luka's butt for 6 years. Cuba doesn't have control anymore. They stabbed him in the back this year. That's just the way things went down.
Yeah, and it was obviously stunning for many reasons, but I still want, maybe there's a book to Cuban selling, because I think that's something we all still don't understand in all this. You've obviously covered Luka since the beginning, and among those interesting things is they traded for him, so it's not like they just drafted him, but what are some of the things that fans that aren't there on a regular basis or aren't following the Mavericks will learn about Luka and maybe how he's wired or how he got into basketball and been a pro, now becoming one of the, top 3 players in the league right now?
For me, probably the most interesting part of writing this book is I did visit Slovenia. I followed his Slovenian national team during group play in Eurobasket that summer of 2022. And I thought it was important to kind of get a feel of where he's from, to meet people in that Slovenian basketball world, understand that culture. And I did there's a chapter specifically on the Slovenian national team in the book, because I thought that was a clear, important illustration that this guy will naturally lean towards loyalty. The fact he plays for Slovenia every single summer, just how important that is. Like, look, for superstars in the NBA, national team commitments are case by case, year by year.
Yeah.
He's an exception in that regard, which honestly was a lot like Dirk for the vast majority of his career. And then the fact that he plays for Slovenia at all, when he hadn't played in an official tournament for Slovenia until Eurobasket when he was 17, and this tiny little nation of 2 million people won the whole thing with him and Goran Dragic starring. So he essentially was a national team free agent with a Spanish passport, with Serbian roots. Those Serbia and Spain are established powers. He could have hopped on those bandwagons, but he was loyal to his homeland. It's a little bit different in terms of homeland, home country, your blood, versus an NBA franchise. But there's no question Luka wanted to spend his whole career in Dallas. It was on the Mavericks to make that a reasonable pursuit, right? To give him a chance to compete. through a whole bunch of drama, dysfunction, twists, turns, massive missteps, they managed to get it done.
And
And
the
then
amazing,
they
go ahead.
decided they didn't want him.
Yeah, right. And the amazing thing about it is I think there was, because of LeBron, right, and draft him in the All-Star game, and you could tell he had admired him from afar for so long. We all kind of thought, well, if you got to do it, you're going to have to go to Dallas. Is LeBron going to move on? Well, it turns out he doesn't have to go anywhere to be able to play with Luka, and it just sets up the Lakers so well, tripping into it's something like here in Indy. You're never going to see a superstar come, and it seems like they keep getting one guy after another to not only either stay there or to be able to acquire it. I want to go back to the Slovenian part because I love that fact. You got to go there. You got to trace his roots a little bit and experience maybe some of that. Were you able to do anything like go to his old home or talk to the local cafe or gather stuff like that even beyond the national team? And if so, kind of what were some of your observations from visiting there? Because I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, so there is an apartment building where he spent a lot of his childhood, and went by that, and then like the courts where he would play every day after school. Now those courts look a lot different because the Jordan brand and Luka have come in and completely revitalized them, and now they're like these beautiful, pristine. But you kind of got a feel for it, and it's like these courts, and then there's like these ping pong, metal ping pong tables, and there's like a beer stand over there. So definitely kind of got a feel for that. Saw some of the gyms where he grew up. Honestly, unrelated to Luka, but was able to see a lot of Slovenia. It's a beautiful country. Like it is one of the most beautiful places that I've ever seen, and really cool. Like, you can hike up to the technically hills, felt like mountains as you're hiking them. Hike up to the top of mountains, and hey, there's this 11th century castle overlooking this beautiful lake and stuff like that. So that part of the trip I really enjoyed, and was able, like, I met a guy who played. The one time Luka had played for the Slovenian national team before Eurobasket, it was in a friendly tournament, so it wasn't like an official tournament, but the under 16 team, I met a guy who played on that team with him. And he told me a great story about that tournament, and a story where Luka got into it with it was described to me as like a Pat Bev type on Romania, who caught him with an elbow, and Luka got payback and then some, talking all kinds of trash. It was a great story, just kind of showing you the ruthless, competitive nature that has just always been part of this guy's DNA. And so, like I said, that's the part of the process and of writing this thing that I enjoyed the most, for sure.
You set out to do this book. How long ago, and what was the overall process? I'm fascinated, obviously, as a writer, and what goes into that, and setting an outline and maybe discussing a few points that, as much as you know him, you want to find out a little bit more about what.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I know Luka from an arm's distance, that he keeps the media.
Sure, like all of us with these.
Sure.
Yes.
But I've covered his entire career, and certainly among media members, I think I've got as good a perspective on him, and I think I've covered him fairly accurately, not always in flattering fashion, but certainly reflective of the special talent that he is, and the flaws that are frankly is apparent as his talent. But this is a deal I agreed to midway through that 21-22 season, just before they go on that run to the Western Conference Finals, just before they lose Jalen Brunson, who emerges as co-star, this guy who came in the same draft class as him, lose Brunson for nothing. Like I told you, I took the trip to Slovenia and Germany for Eurobasket that summer. The book was originally supposed to come out last March, and it got pushed back here. There's some changes at the publishing company. The guy who was editing my book left the company, got pushed back a year, and last summer I was very glad that it did, because the ending at that point would have been very gloomy and doomy. Wow, they've lost Brunson for nothing. The KP trade was a whiff. They traded for Kyrie, but they had to tank the last couple games to keep a top 10 protected pick owed from the original big swing that they took in the Luka era. There's just fear of if the Mavericks fail to get this thing right, Luka could be looking to be traded at some point in the near future. And that would have come out just before they go on a finals run, which really kind of shows you, just like you said, the roller coaster nature of this ride. So it got pushed back a year, and then just another little plot twist 6 weeks before the book comes out, and had to hustle to get a final unplanned chapter written. But look, man, it's been like 6.5 spectacular years for this guy in a Mavericks uniform. All kinds of drama, dysfunction, and chaos within the franchise during that time, some of which you could say Luka played a role in. I would say a sliver of it you could put on his shoulders. A lot of it was, not on him at all. And then just a wild plot twist at the end. Then, honestly, a lot of the chaos early on did involve a certain coach who's known well by folks up in your parts.
I do want to get there, but you're absolutely probably maybe fortunate in timing. You were probably frustrated, right? In that March, you'd put all that work in, hit all those deadlines. It probably about to come out right before the playoffs, and then it just, couldn't have been almost. Only thing better probably would be for them not to print those, what I think you said, 8,000 books beforehand, but otherwise, just phenomenal. Yeah, let's go here to Indianapolis, where, by the way, me and you can relate because we've both been banned for unnecessary reasons that none of us understand. You're back, at least. Nonetheless, take me to RC and his role or contributions in drafting Luka, and then that relationship, because from afar, I don't know the best word to say it. Maybe it's complicated between those two individuals.
It's certainly complicated. And, Rick had say in the draft process, but Donnie Nelson stood on the table for this guy. Bob Voulgaris, who wasn't yet an official part of the organization, but was a voice in Cuban's ear and a voice that Cuban listened to, he pounded the table for this guy. And look, Bob and Luka had their issues, or Luka had his issues with Bob, I should say, later on. But Bob, was saying this is the best player in the draft. Donnie Nelson was saying this is the best player in the draft. This is the guy that the Mavericks were tanking to get. And look, Rick executed that tank very well.
And by the way, I should clarify for non-Mavericks people, Bob Voulgaris, he's known for gambling and analytics and strategy and things, and no longer works with the Mavericks. But that's he was one of the first sports gambling guys to succeed, it seems like, at least how most of us refer to him, right?
Yeah,
Sorry, I wanted to define him.
Became a millionaire as a gambler, created a pretty big Twitter following. Cuban really valued his data. And then Cuban hired him after paying him as a consultant like nobody knew about. Cuban hired him as the director of quantitative research, I believe was the exact title. A lot of people refer to him as the shadow GM. And worked hand in hand with Rick. Like Rick, after I maybe initially what the hell is this? Like Rick really valued his data, this 5-out offensive style. They worked hand in hand to create that. And look, I think everybody who's Indiana understands. Certainly people who follow the page, Rick Carlisle is a brilliant basketball mind. He's one of the best X's and O's coaches, certainly in the NBA today, and you can argue in NBA history. Rick's people skills, although my understanding is they have certainly improved in this go-around in Indiana, that he has mellowed. Rick's people skills were a challenge, a challenge. Sure. And there was I chronicle this, there was a disastrous team meeting 1 week into Luka's career. They'd just come from Atlanta, got up 26. It's a TNT game, Luka versus Trae Young. The two guys got traded for each other, got up 26, blew the lead, lose the game. Go to Toronto, and it's your kind of team meeting, film session in the hotel ballroom the next day. And Rick just went ballistic, said a bunch of things, not even directly to Luka, two other people, to Dennis Smith Jr. For one, accusing him in front of the whole team of being jealous of Luka. Basically cussed out the whole team. It's a disaster. And that cracked the foundation of the relationship that he was trying to build with Luka. And that relationship was strained the rest of their time together. Rick realized at some point during Luka's rookie year that this kid was not just talented, like special. Everything was going to revolve around him for that franchise moving forward. It was a power struggle. Rick was not going to win. And Rick's strategy, basically for the rest of Luka's time, was to kiss his butt regardless of circumstances, which gave him something in common with Mark Cuban. But now the relationship had an expiration date on it because Luka, like kissing Luka's butt, Luka at the time he had disdain for Rick. I think that's calmed over their years apart. But having said that, look, Rick does deserve some credit for this guy's ascension to superstardom and how quickly it happened. Obviously, Luka's a unique talent. He was going to be great regardless, but Rick didn't just realize it, but he built this offense around. First of all, he gave him the keys. He gave him the ball, which when Luka came in the league, there was a lot of questions. What is he? He started off as a small forward. Mm-hmm. I had a GM or an executive rather with another team that had a high lottery pick. Give me a Hito Turkoglu comp right after Luka was drafted. Like, yeah, he's going to be kind of like a playmaking forward. He can't be a primary ball handler.
Because he's got size, he's a big body, a little thick, so you can
not
kind of
not that not that explosive. Isn't going to get by guy. So that was kind of and it wasn't alone. There was a lot of doubt that Luka could be a primary ball handler, much less a point guard. But Rick said, "Hey, here's the ball. You're the point guard. Let's build everything around, opening the floor up for him, giving him space." And obviously, look, the guy has been putting up historic numbers from the get-go, but his second year number, he was an MVP candidate his second season as a 20-year-old.
Yeah.
And, I do think Rick deserves some credit for that. But again, that relationship was cracked very early and never recovered. And, that ultimately led to Rick Carlisle's departure from Dallas.
And why I think that's also interesting is all those things you said then surely helped inform him once they acquired Tyrese Haliburton, it's the face of the team, the highest paid player in franchise history, how he handles that and maybe not to make some of those same mistakes. Now, Ty is not on that same level at all at Luka, but close.
He's a hell of a talent. And look, Rick Carlisle, I can guarantee you, Rick had a lot of influence in them targeting Tyrese Haliburton. The Mavericks tried to get Haliburton in the draft. They tried to trade Jalen Brunson, 18 and 31, for Tyrese Haliburton, and they offered it to every team until Haliburton went off the board, including the New York Knicks, who had the 8th overall pick. They called Leon Rose, "Hey, we got your godson. We got him.
You want him? Let's go."
And the Knicks wanted Obi Toppin. So, but the point is, Bob Voulgaris had Haliburton at the time as the number one player in that draft class. Rick obviously dove in and was studying him and loved his game. And Haliburton was in a situation, obviously, in Sacramento where he was damn good, but it wasn't his team. It was De'Aaron Fox's team. You could see his ability, but he didn't have the keys. And the Pacers made a great trade. Sabonis is a good player, but that was a phenomenal trade for the Indiana Pacers. It was I know Haliburton's heart was broken at the time, much like Luka's. After the trade from Dallas. But it was a great deal for Haliburton because he is playing for a coach who is a brilliant offensive mind, who gave him the keys right away, and who, much like he did with Luka in Dallas, built a system and built a roster around maximizing this guy's incredible talent.
And that's absolutely what stood out to me, and the fact that he's also not, it's more the modern style too, but not calling a ton of plays, just empowering Ty to go run the team, to organize and play, really wanting to maximize what they do in transition and set up before the defense sets up.
Well, you know where the roots of that go back to?
What's that?
That's Jason Kidd and Rick.
Oh, sure, sure.
Look, they were butting heads for a while there. And Rick is well known for being a very controlling coach, right? And certainly a guy for most of Rick's career, he's calling plays every single possession. Yeah. He's got the strings on the sideline controlling things. And him and Jay Kidd butted heads about it. And then Rick finally, and this was a staff where there was Terry Stotts, there was Dwayne Casey, and they made the decision, okay, let's hand the reins over to Jay Kidd. He is a Hall of Fame point guard, and they started playing this flow style of basketball that kind of was, along with the 7 seconds or less Suns, like this is kind of the beginning of the modern style of play. And obviously that team won a championship. But even early on in Luka's career, there was some back and forth about the play call. And before Rick finally said, okay, here's the keys. We're opening up the floor and off we go. And look, Rondo, his brief time in Dallas, there was certainly
that had to be fun because of their minds, but also the contentiousness that's probably inevitable between those two, right?
Yeah, and the big blow up that they had was with Rondo blowing off play calls from the sideline. That's also the time when Rick and I had, a handful of times, probably the most memorable time of Rick and I butting heads in a post-game press conference.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the time. I know you're swamped this week. I appreciate you jumping on with me and sharing about Luka and your book, The Wonder Boy, that I encourage everyone to check out. I look forward to opening up my copy here. And thanks again for the time, Tim.
I really appreciate you having me, and adios amigos.